Good morning and welcome, just officially welcome, and welcome to the people on the internet. Welcome to some Yin Yang Yoga. So Yin is a really slow practice where we kind of hang out with the poses for a while. Yang indicates a more kind of active style of yoga. We're going to start with the Yin. And so we're going to do a sequence of hip openers that it might be more comfortable to have a couple little things around. So something like a blanket, a block, or something that could act that way. I threw a couple throw pillows, something along that line. So you have some soft things to pad up any joints that don't comfortably reside in each of the poses. And then you can kind of play with the edges of it. So we're going to start with a butterfly pose. Now I'm going to do this as a seated forward fold. So leaving a little bit more space than you might for other poses and kind of getting settled in. Now for me, forward bends generally are pretty good. But if you have trouble with forward bending poses, you could do this as a reclining pose, lay on your back instead. So we'll just choose something that works best. And then I'm also going to give myself a little something to lean into. Now, Yin doesn't necessarily mean that it's totally still, it's just mostly still. But sometimes I'll do like a little bit of a really gentle, slow lean in one direction and then the other, just to kind of explore the different places, you know, that the pose kind of touches. So like if I lean this way, I'll feel it a little differently on the left side of my back than the right, and a little bit more in the left hip than the right. If I lean a little bit more the other way, then I'm gonna get a different kind of array of sensation. So you're welcome to also kind of do that, especially in the morning. I like to just sort of gently morph the pose back and forth so I can see what's happening. So we'll stay for one more minute here. I'm going to take 3 more breaths. So once you've inhaled the third time, just hold that air in and come all the way up. And you can kind of lean back, unwind the legs a bit. So they're not doing anything visible. They're just making lots of noise. So we're going to take the legs out into a V, but one leg is going to be bent and the other leg is going to be straight. Ugh. Now this is option number 1, which is to hold the leg in that position and then let yourself bend sideways. Now what I like about this version is that there's a little bit more of an emphasis in the spine here because the pelvis is mostly still. And so then the spine moves and it's really kind of, that's where the emphasis is. You can, if you'd like, switch this up for the gate pose, which is to bring this leg around the back. And essentially you just bring the foot in as close as you can to the hip. And then that tilts the pelvis and then it becomes more a pose in the pelvis and a little less in the spine. So just a little different flavor. So you can decide which one of those you want to do. Sometimes I like to have a little armrest or a place to put my elbow. So you can add some pillows or other things to your world. And then we'll take out, I'm going to put my arm up like this for a little while and then I'm going to put my arm down. You could also wrap your arm behind your back. That's kind of a nice alternative position. We'll stay here for about 2 minutes. Let's do about 3 more breaths here. And again, I'm going to hold the third one in and then come all the way up. So now this guy is going to be the bottom leg. So if you had that leg swung around behind you, just unwind it, bring it up front. That guy's going on the bottom. And then we're going to take this leg and put it up on top. Now you can do knees on top of knees or shins on top of shins. Or I like to do, I just put a block in front because then it's not as tender on my, the ankle bone doesn't poke into my thigh. So you can try it that way as well. Now, some people will be more comfortable kind of leaning back in this pose or sitting just upright. And then other people might find their pelvis wants to drift forward, so you can experiment a little bit with where that lands. And then we'll stay here for a couple minutes. about 3 more breaths here. We're going to inhale our way all the way up. Kind of lean back, unwind. Oh. And then just pause for a moment and do some movement. And when you're ready, do the other side. So starting with either wrapping the leg around behind or this version, this Janya version. So finding our way in, and we'll hang out for a couple minutes. Forget that while you're holding your poses, just breathe deep and smooth and rhythmic. We're going to stay for about 3 more breaths. Take a nice big breath. We'll come all the way up. And again, like, so if you had the leg back around behind, you'll bring that around the front. Otherwise, just moving it in a little bit might be enough. And then you can add your other leg on top in whatever way suits you the best. The object of the game with this shape is just to get the legs pretty close together. So whether they're overlapping or just pretty close to hips distance apart, we'll get, depending on your anatomy, you'll get a similar sort of stretch on the outer side of the hip. So some people, the way the hips are created, like the angle of the acetabulum, the femur bone, all that jazz, it's better if the legs are closer to the very center line. And then for others of us, I guess for whatever reason, the shape that we landed on, a little bit wider apart is better. So just kind of feel that out for yourself. Sometimes I like to do the 2 knees overlapping, but I have to elevate my hips. So you can make little adjustments to kind of accommodate anatomy. We're just kind of letting ourselves relax into the shape and breathe. Take 3 more breaths here. Float up, lean it back, and unwind it. So when you're ready, we're going to move on to some slightly more flowy things, starting with some cat-cows. So you can do those seated where you are, kind of rounding and swaying the back and forth, or you can come up to all fours and do them that way. That's what I'm going to do. So kind of letting my spine settle back to a more neutral position, and then I'll get myself onto my hands and knees. So you can always, if you have being on your hands and knees is tricky, you can always add some padding. Like you could throw a folded blanket up underneath your hips, or underneath your knees rather, or you could add some support under the arms so the wrists don't have to be quite as bent. The hand further out in front can be a great way to kind of minimize wrist trouble. Just kind of experiment with the pose. It doesn't have to line up in a particular way. You want to make sure that it's comfortable for you. And if having any weight at all on your hands is tricky for the wrist, for whatever reason, then go ahead and stick with these kinds of movements where you send the pelvis forward and kind of broaden out the collarbone, and then round back, send the pelvis backward. So those little back and forths give you a similar effect. A little different, but similar. So you don't have to have as much pressure on the wrists. Hello. Again, it doesn't have to be just these 2 little shapes. You can kind of play with your shapes. Go side to side a little bit. All right, so I'm going to bring my right leg forward so that I'm in a lunging shape. And I'm going to, again, do like a slightly more dynamic variation on this. So I might find that because I'm moving back and forth, my knee gets a little sensitive, and for me, just lifting the shin off the ground a little bit, or even just tucking the toes under, is a way to help minimize that. You may find that it's better to pad the surface of, underneath your knee. So I'm going to send my hips back a little bit past, so they're going backwards of the knee that's on the ground, and then I'm sending the hips forward of that knee. And so just going back and forth, finding the right stopping place in those 2 directions, whatever that is for you. Oh, goodness. All right, so I'm going to do that one more time with this sort of movement, dynamic flowiness. And then I'm going to switch this up. So I'm going to bring both hands to the inside with my hips back, turning to the diagonal. Now I like to leave the blocks in my world because it gives me a little bit more height for my hands. I'm just kind of folding in. This gives me a little different version of a hamstring stretch. A little more towards the inside. And then I'm going to take that leg all the way back behind me and give it a little shimmy. Down and do the opposite leg. And so again, sending the hips behind or further back than the knee, and then bringing them forward, just kind of experimenting in that array, range of motion. There we go. That's the right word. Okay, so I'm going to do it one more time going forward. And then when I come back, I'm going to pause there, kind of bring myself to this diagonal. Leg out of there and give it a little shimmy. And then I'm going to do a little child's pose with a twist. I like this. Some people call it thread the needle. So it's just a way of getting the back of the shoulder. So I'm going to put the shoulder on the ground, this arm reaching around over my back. Now, you want the weight on your head to be very, very light. So it's just resting on the floor. So that might mean you need to shift back a little bit or forward a little bit. And then I use my spare hand to sort of push myself backwards, okay? And then once I'm pushing, I can kind of use that resistance to turn my shoulder in toward the ground a little bit, and I can move my hips around to get just the right amount of stretch. Push backwards a little bit through the shoulder. One side's a little different than the other, so it'll be slightly different. It's the way it often is with yoga poses. All right, so I'm going to come out of this side by making some space with my spare arm there. I'm going to give that shoulder a little movement before I do the other side. Oh, it feels nice to do a little movement. So then we'll do the opposite shoulder. Tickle. Oh, what are you doing? Oh, ferrets. Oh. All right, wiggle it out. Now, you can do downward facing dog here. I'm going to do a little bit, I'm just going to do an alternative to downward dog. So if downward dog is not generally your jam, then this is a way to get yourself onto your feet instead. So you can come back to this kind of notion of the cat-cow. We're just going to put one foot on the ground, kind of move back and forth. And you can move your spine up and down, or I just shift the hips back and forth and kind of go side to side. And then we're going to put the other foot on the ground. And essentially we're just going to push the weight back into the feet. And then it becomes more of a squat. Now if you can't squat that deep, that's fine. Just lift your hips up a little bit. And then eventually kind of work the legs straight and bent, so there's not any weight in your hands. You can keep the head up a little higher if the issue that you have with downward dog is having your head below your hips. Just keep the head up a little higher. And then you can I think everybody who's doing downward dog, when you get yourself to a point where you don't need any more downward dog, you can come to this forward bending position as well. So I'm just folding forward and then coming back up. And again, you don't have to go, your head doesn't ever have to go below your knees. You can keep it up a little higher if that's better for you. All right. So eventually come into a standing position. All right, so then just find your way into mountain pose. So I'm turning my toes forward, getting myself a little bit settled. There's a lot of activity going on around here today. Kind of settling the shoulders. And then you're just going to pause and breathe. I'm going to get my mat a little damp so that it won't be sticky. All right, so we're going to shift the weight into one leg. I'm going to start with the right leg. Shifting the weight into the right leg, I'm going to bring the left leg up, and essentially I'm just going to lift it up as high as I can, and then I'm going to swing it back and take myself to whatever version of Warrior 3 I wind up with. I'm going to see if I can do that several times, lifting the leg and then sending it back. And lifting the leg, trying to keep myself balanced. It's not always going to work out that way, but I'm going to try. Lifting the leg and then sending it back, and then I'm going to go straight back into a high lunge. Ooh, on the tail end of that. And again, the notion is that I'm going to work with whatever wobbliness I have, stay as balanced as possible. So from here, I'm going to take myself into a little bit of a dynamic movement, straightening out the front leg and pressing this heel toward the ground, and then just coming back to the lunge, and then straightening out the front leg and pressing the heel toward the ground, and then back onto the ball of my foot a little bit, shifting forward. Straightening out. Ooh, it's wobbly. Pressing the heel toward the ground. So I don't necessarily want my heel to touch, so you can add a little more space as needed. All right, so then I'm going to take my whole pose and take it forward back to mountain pose. That's the theory anyway. I didn't make it in one step, but I have goals. So we're here, and then just noticing the difference between the two. And I'm just going to let myself settle for just a bit more. Try to find kind of that sense of the pelvis being relatively even before I shift the weight into the opposite leg. So again, I'm going to take the right leg, bring it up, and then send it back. And you might be able to go a little bit more like almost completely level and still maintain the balance. I'm trying to find that point where it feels like it's just about to fall apart, and then bring it back. So one more of those, and then I'm going to try to step back into that high lunge. Ooh, maybe finding my balance there, everything pointing forward, and then straightening out. Ooh, okay. Straightening out the front leg and pressing the heel down if I'm feeling steady. Moving everything forward a little bit. Heel down. Coming back onto the ball of my foot a little bit more. Ooh, I'm going to do that twice more. Heel down. Everything forward. And then heel down. And then I'm going to try to step right back into mountain pose. And so then checking in, seeing if things feel a little more even. Front to back, left to right. So let's do something like that again with this different set of poses. So I'm going to take myself into a tree. Okay, so you can have the arms up or not. Then I'm going to try to pick this knee up, and you can potentially bring the leg out straight to the side. Ooh. So from the tree to the lifted knee. Ooh. From the tree to the lifted knee. Oh, that didn't work out. Try again. And then taking that leg up and stepping it back. And this time I'm going to wind up with a warrior two eventually. So, what I like about these balancing sequences, it makes my hip burn. Like in a good way, like muscle strengthening way. And then we'll just flow between and reverse warrior in a side angle a few times. Add a little bit more of that side waist action to this. Okay, so I'm gonna do a little half moon balance here. Pounce up from underneath there. So I'm gonna try to get this left leg all the way up. I'm gonna try to let go of this block in a moment, but first, come into this balancing shape. I don't know how long it's going to be without the block. There it is. And then I'm going to bring this guy back and try to find my way back to mountain pose. And so again, I'm noticing the difference between the two hips. Is there one? There is one for me. Okay, so then I'm going to bring myself back to the tree. And once I get reasonably steady, I'm trying to lift that knee up to the side and bring it back. And lift it up to the side and bring it back to tree. Lift it to the side. Bring it back to tree. And one more time, I'm going to lift it and then step it back into the warrior two. Trying to kind of find that steady place and then move between the warrior two and the side angle. Okay, so then I'm going to go for a half moon balance. I'll move over just a little bit. So I'm on a steady surface. And eventually I'm going to try to let go with this left hand. I may not even be able to do that right away. But hopefully, eventually, I can let go. It's fun. All right, so then we're going to bring that leg theoretically right back into the balance or into a position for mountain pose. Coming up halfway and folding it in. And then coming all the way up. Giving it a big stretch. Ooh. Okay, so just pausing with mountain pose one more time. I'm getting distracted by tiny furry critters, but it's kind of fun. All right, so we're going to take ourselves into a squat. And so if you would rather, you can do downward dog. Instead. keep her under there or not. So I'm going to take this back and we're going to come all the way down to the belly. Oh my goodness. Once you're on your belly, we're going to do some little cobras. Some little cobra shapes. So reach back through the legs, press them into the ground. Use your back muscles to lift your back. Hands plant. And then you press down enough. No, I did not keep you under there. Open your collarbones nice and wide. Oh. Okay. And you can slide the hands into different positions and try out, like, do I like it a little further back? All right, one more. Let the neck go along for the ride. Oh. So we're going to take this into a Sphinx pose. And I'm going to do a little bit of work for my neck. So if my elbows are a little bit forward, this is a little bit easier. If they're tucked underneath here, I find it a little harder to get to the neck. So drop the chin, and then you can just take the chin and basically, I'm going to widen it out a little bit, just draw a little line over your collarbone. So you're looking back, you can see if you can see back enough to see your toes. And all that does for me is trying to look for my toes. I'm just feeling for the stretch on this right side of my neck, right? I'm going to my left. And then when I do the same thing on the other side, turning my head to the right to look back to the right, I'm turning it just enough that I start to feel something interesting happening on the left side. We're just going down to the collarbone and up and or down to the breastbone and up and around the collarbone. Down to the breastbone, up and around the collarbone. Do that one more time, and then I'm going to do some shoulder work. Okay, so for the shoulders, I'm going to take my arms out and just kind of hold myself in this cobra. So I find sometimes I like it better with the fingers pointing out. Usually it's more like forward or slightly at a diagonal. I like the spider fingers a lot. Sometimes I'll flatten the palms to get a little more leverage. So I'm going to take my right shoulder blade up towards my head. So I'm going to turn my head out of the way, looking back to the left, and then pull the left shoulder blade down and towards my right hip. So that's the movement. It's almost like you're trying to draw a figure eight is how it feels in my upper back. So now the left shoulder blade's going up, and I'm pulling my right shoulder blade down toward my left hip. And so I'm just going to go back and forth. All right, now I'm going to roll onto my side, and I'm going to use my arm basically as a headrest, but you could put a little blanket or a block or something there. And then I'm going to work a kind of stretch through my shoulder, and also for me it also lands in my hamstrings and mostly the inner thigh and inner hamstring area. But I'm going to grab this big toe. Now, if grabbing the big toe is problematic, you can lasso your foot. As long as you can kind of push up and pull slightly on your arm, you're going to get a similar situation. Now, my body, if I let it, would fall backwards. So I'm trying to use my core to stabilize my left hip as best I can up on top of the right hip. Now you can bend this bottom knee for more stability, reach it out to create a little bit more of a challenge there. And I'm pushing, kind of pulling the arm with the leg. I don't know where they are, but they're making a lot of noise. So we're gonna breathe some more. Okay, now I'm going to let this knee bend. This knee is going this way. I have to scoot a little bit because I'm too close to the wall. The knee is going over the top, and then I'm bringing the shoulder around to the bottom. So I'm going to wind up in a twist. Now, if you'd rather, you could do a more supported twist by bringing the bottom leg in. Okay, we're going to take one more breath. And then essentially what I would do is just roll back to the center and roll over onto the other side. But first, little windshield wipers and a little back massage is nice. And since I'm coming back toward you for the twist, I'm going to turn away from you for this first pose. But I think you may have it. Okay, so we're going to try to grab the big toe, and if that proves impossible, then we will do something else. But I'm pushing so that there's a little sense of lengthening through my shoulder socket. And I'm trying to keep myself as stable as possible. Breathing deep. So you may find, like for me, because my arm is short, there's quite a lot of stretch going on with my arm. You may find that if you lower the leg a little bit down toward the floor, kind of straight down towards the opposite leg, you will wind up with a little bit more of a shoulder stretch rather than trying to pull your leg up higher. And then when you're ready, we're going to transition that into the twist. So finding that sort of dynamic point where you can work a little bit of the hip and a little bit of the chest muscle without causing any trouble for the spine. More breaths. I'm going to come on back to the middle. Now, taking a moment here just to sort of rinse out. All right, so I'm going to do one more pose for suggest somewhere between 7 and 10 breaths, and you can decide how long you want to hold this, but you can hold a regular bridge since it's not going to be quite so long. I'm going to actually do a supported bridge using a pillow to support my hips. So she's been tickling my feet this whole time. Okay, well, not the whole time. So I've got my hips up on a support, and I want to make sure that the whole pelvis is supported. You could use a block too. And then I'm just going to straighten out the legs. And I may have to shift my arms just to keep the weight distributed fairly evenly. So for me, this feels pretty good. Sometimes if it's too spicy, I'll keep one foot resting on the floor and just do half and half. Just basically I'm trying to get a stretch through this whole front part of the hip. That's what I'm after. So however it works best for you, more dynamic or a little more passive. This one is the more passive version. Adding these slightly more active touches to it, kind of lengthening out through my leg, giving that whole leg a little bit of a shimmy on either side. Oh. I'm going to do about 4 more breaths, and then I'm going to come out of here and go into kind of the setup for a final relaxation. To come out, this is the reason I like having the pillow here, is that all I really have to do is get my feet back on the floor and lift my hips just enough to put that where I want it for Shavasana. So it's a nice, easy transition. And then you can snuggle the shoulders as you like. And then our task for the last few minutes here is just to relax as completely as possible. So our nervous system has a chance to just let go. Even the most mild, gentle yoga practices ask a lot of the sensory nerves. So giving all of those nerve pathways a chance to not have to send a lot of data, so the body can really shift into a deep relaxation. That's the goal. Take a moment just to notice that your body is breathing again. And let that breath get a little deeper, almost like you're trying to breathe down to your toes. Take a big breath and stretch yourself out. Give the fingers and toes and the wrist and ankles a little bit of movement. And then when it seems like a good idea, you can give yourself a little back massage. And then, some people rock themselves up. I like to do this kind of really slow, gradual push to an upright position. Ugh. So however you get there is fine. Thank you for joining me for the new time slot here today. Let me know at the end how you feel about it. We're going to take a nice big breath and a big deep sigh. Welcome to the rest of your Saturday. Namaste, yogis. Or whenever you're watching this, if you're watching it on the YouTube.